Richard Feynman said, "Never confuse education with intelligence. You can have a PhD and still be an idiot." What are some real-life examples of this? My wife's stepfather was a chemist who currently has diabetes. One night he went to the ER because his blood sugar was dangerously high. He claimed he was eating well, he normally doesn't, so there's no reason why his blood sugar was high. In his car was a 2-liter bottle of ginger ale mixed in with grape juice. He said that the two canceled their sugars out and we didn't know what we were talking about because he was a chemist and he knows how to combine things. Holy duck. That is insane. It is. With respect to sugar, unless you're doing a low-sugar juice you've got the same numbers as soda, because he doesn't drink diet, but when I was hearing this I'm just trying to imagine the taste. Ugh. This happened earlier this year and he still argues he's right. Like dude, you add a vodka kicker to a margarita, does it suddenly cancel out the alcohol? Or is a Long Island iced tea no longer potent because you've canceled everything else out? I'm no scientist but I've added my sodas together when I was younger and I never had suddenly regular tasting water. Edit, it's been shown to me by many Redditors that I am incorrect in that I held on to a disproven opinion that the diet soda sweetener had an increased link to cancer. I admit I am wrong, though it never stopped me from drinking Diet Dr. Pepper. Like he might be a chemist, but that doesn't mean he knows anything useful about diabetic biochemistry. You see this with engineers a lot too. Engineers will be like, I know X because I'm an engineer. No, you're a mechanical engineer who works in design and finite element analysis, you do not have the same level of clarity on nuclear reactor maintenance. Your sad devotion to that ancient religion hasn't given you the clairvoyance needed to locate those stolen plot-choking noises. If an ancient religion was giving my boss magical telekinetic powers, you'd better believe I would not be giving them sass. Ah yes, the ancient Jedi religion from the bygone era of nearly 25 years ago. To be fair, both the original and the Disney expanded universe made it clear that Darth Sidious mounted a broad-scale propaganda campaign specifically designed to make the Jedi look like useless parasites who never had any real powers. Plus there were only about 10k Jedi at the height of their power. Spread over the billion planets with quadrillions of people, meaning Jedi were rare as duck. Star Wars never understood scale. There were only a few million clones for the Clone Wars. Not billions, not trillions, not the teeming masses of the Astra Militarum are incalculable even to the Administratum like Warhammer 40k. Millions. I did the math once, there were like 2.3 clones per member planet of the Republic. Multiple sources are adamant these numbers are correct, despite making no sense. Also, most planets don't have auxiliary forces, sector fleets, or planetary garrisons. They just sorta get occupied. Until clones come to save them. I have a PhD and I am an idiot in most respects. All it takes to get a PhD is to be really good at or persistent in doing research in one narrow area of study. Edit, so several commenters pointed out that I simplified things too much. A PhD also requires hard work, luck, and some basic competence in a topic. But that doesn't preclude one from being completely clueless in other aspects of life. The best quote I've heard about this is, they don't give PhDs to the smartest people, they give them to the most stubborn. True. I quit my PhD. Everyone felt so sorry for me. They shouldn't. It was a great life move. The thing I learned most in academia, an area of learning, is don't get into academia. Yup. I left my PhD behind and took the Ms. My advisor was an unhappy, abusive man who thought his co-workers in the department were morons and treated them as such, and encouraged his graduate students to treat their peers that way. I went from 190 pounds to 260 pounds during grad school from depression eating. COVID didn't help, because there was no way you could win in that lab. Successes were because you got lucky, failures were because you were incompetent and not because you were using equipment from the 50s or reagents older than you. Leaving was the best thing I could have done. Now I have a nice government job, make more than any of the people in that lab, and have lost 50 of the 70 pounds I gained. Peter Duesberg. Molecular biologist who works as a researcher at UC Berkeley and has an otherwise stellar career and well known for his work. Became an AIDS denialist, claiming there's no link between HIV and AIDS. Led countless people down the rabbit hole, including many who were HIV positive. These individuals ended up infecting others and refusing antiretroviral therapies. This included an AIDS denialist activist named Christine Majore who infected her infant through breastfeeding thinking, hey, it's not a big deal, it's just HIV, it doesn't cause AIDS. Kary Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize for inventing PCR, also questioned the link between HIV and AIDS. I chatted with him on a plane once and he was indeed pretty dumb. Edit, dumb in many ways, but clearly unique and smart in others. I'm not here to bash Kary Mullis because PCR is cool as hell and he seemed cool in some ways too. Met him once after a lecture at the university I was working at. It was amazing to me how he stuck to his mantra of just a surfer dude researcher who single-handedly conceived of PCR and conveniently left out the dozens of other scientists and technicians who helped with the preceding work and subsequent refinement of the process. Yeah, it was funny because when I met him I was seated with him and another scientist, on a plane to Boston, of course. I was telling them both about some stuff I did with a fancy, at the time, version of PCR and he just listened and then talked about surfing, mostly, and I was thinking who is this bozo? When I got off the plane, the other scientist was like it's not every day you meet a Nobel laureate, and I was like what? Who was that? And that's when he told me who it was. He had gotten Mullis' card and gave it to me, and I still have it somewhere. Also just a surfer dude researcher who single-handedly conceived of PCR during an acid trip so it kinda still tracks. Ha, that's a pretty interesting encounter. I had a similar, though not as impressive, one on a place to East Africa. This lovely woman next to me was asking why I was traveling there, so I told her that I was living there, doing NIH-funded research. Before we got off the plane, she handed me her card. She was the top CDC representative in the country we were traveling to. Good contact to have. I worked with a girl that graduated from Brown. She would never shut up about it. Always Brown this and Brown that. I went to a state school and it was apparent that she looked down on anyone that didn't attend an Ivy League school, so one day she was doing that and I couldn't stop myself. I said something like, "Oh, you went to Brown?" And yet, here we are, together in the same place, doing the same job. I had someone on my ship who wouldn't shut up about being older and college educated. She was 3 ranks below me. She had no grasp on the concept of experience. Yeah, I have a degree, but if someone has more experience, I will always listen to that for sure. Maybe it's because I have a blue-collar background. I know some that just won't listen. It never works out well for them. I have a PhD, and I work with a bunch of PhDs. Basically, a lot of them think that because they succeeded in one area, they are an expert in every other area of life. And they always have strong opinions about everything. I think it's also called a PhD syndrome. I think my imposter syndrome cannibalized my PhD syndrome. I had a professor for higher mathematics who had real difficulties figuring out how to extract a cup of coffee from the vending machine. Bless him. I had a student job doing it for the classroom equipment at my college. My job wouldn't have existed if having a PhD meant you could figure out technology. I once was a student resource coordinator at a university. Once a computer science professor was having trouble with the computer and projector displaying his presentation. The whole class laughed when I asked him if he checked his connections and it turned out his computer wasn't plugged in. I once had the privilege of telling a $300 consultant that the reason his presentation screen wasn't working was that he'd unplugged it to charge his laptop. He obviously was stalling, at $300 HR. He was a genius after all. Not quite PhD. But I was at a party, in the UK, full of med students and stereotypically everyone was off their face drunk. Well, some guy fell over and broke his collarbone and immediately got rushed by a dozen of them all fussing and asking him the same questions over and going through the checklist. Half an hour later and he's still on the couch in pain and I go in to ask if anybody knows why the ambulance is taking so long. Nobody had an answer because nobody had called one. A party full of medical students hadn't called an ambulance or made any transport arrangements for a guy in severe pain with a broken clavicle. Idiots. That's actually super common in emergencies when there's a group of any kind. One of the first things you learn in a lifeguard certification course is to identify a single person to instruct to call 911. Never just yell out someone call 911 or assume that it's been done because everyone in the group is assuming someone else did it already. It's not necessarily that everyone forgot about it, just that everyone assumed it was the logical first step that someone else would have taken already. Singling somebody out tends to work because in an emergency there are 50 random people all wanting to do something to help but none of them willing to take charge of the situation in fear of ducking it up. Single someone out and you will have taken charge for them and given them something to do that it's hard to be bad at. So they'll do it. Yep. You. Red shirt, call 911. Blue shirt, get me towels. Jacket, first aid kit under the sink. Call 911, and then get back to me. Make sure it's been done, and if there are any more instructions from the operators.